Hey everybody, welcome to USA Wrestling's Moments Off the Mat. We're here with Jess Medina, one of our national team women coaches, and she's in charge of development for our women's national team program. And we're going to get a chance to talk to her about development for all ages today. So Jess, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's nice to have a sunny day here in Colorado and chat with you.
So tell us a little bit about what was the pathway for you starting off wrestling and working your way to being on the national team staff at the Olympic Training Center?
Yeah, so I actually started wrestling when I was 16, and I fell into wrestling. I didn't know anything about the sport. I didn't have anyone in my family that really wrestled, and I couldn't have told you a rule, anything. I had maybe like one friend on the wrestling team. So it's kind of interesting coming from that background and now just being the national team coach for the developmental age. So for me, you know, I grew up in California where girls wrestling was more developed. It wasn't sanctioned at the time, but we did have a unofficial state tournament, which was huge. And there were tons of girls wrestling on their boys team, and there were full girls teams. So it was really a thriving area for girls wrestling. So luckily for me, I had jumped in on my boys team and survived a season and came back for more. And that's when my coaches started doing some research on girls competitions and whatnot. So that was a whole new world for me, girls wrestling. I was a female wrestler and I didn't know how many other girls out there were wrestling. So that tells you how much I knew about the sport, let alone other females in the sport. So it's interesting. Moving forward, I ended up, because of my coach, wrestling in college. And again, I didn't know what my options are. I hadn't even thought about wrestling in college. Back in 2004, there's literally a handful of programs to choose from. So I had some slim pickings, but I knew that I wanted to continue wrestling because I had only wrestled my junior and senior year, and you know, I was hooked at that point. So after that, I had wrestled 4 years in college and had success. And again, I was at the point where I wasn't really done with wrestling, and my coaches yet again just encouraged me to think about continuing. So I moved out here to the Olympic Training Center. I was a resident athlete for 6 years. And I was on the national team. I made a couple world teams, and then I retired in 2016. So after that, I had some time just to have that transition phase of retiring from wrestling as an athlete and figuring out what I wanted to do. And I started coaching at the youth level. So that was really fun. And that was at Beat the Streets Philly. So it was a fun start for me. And I was still not 100% bought in on coaching, just because I wanted to go back to school and weigh my options. So after that, I decided to just jump full force all in, and I started coaching at the college level. So I was coaching at Ferrum College at a D3 school. And my second season in, I had got a phone call from, you know, the national team staff, and I hadn't even considered the position. And, you know, for me, I was still volunteering and still very excited to help and be a part of the program that I feel like I grew up in. And so for me, I hadn't considered myself for the position. And once I had talked to the staff and they had talked to me, it was probably the first time that I really thought about coming back to the program as a coach. So it's been about a year this April, and here I am.
The theme seems to be that you had a lot of coaches that supported your love for the sport all the way through. How important is that?
Oh, that was huge, especially because you know, the more you start wrestling, the older you get, the higher the level, you spend so much time with your coach. And I remember thinking my coaches were almost like, you know, a family member to me, like an uncle or a second dad. And you see these people more than you see your family sometimes. So it was such a huge impact to have really strong coaches, you know, in my life. And at the time, male, you know, mostly male. So it was just really cool to have their support. And, you know, it definitely took some time to trust on both ends, but it was a huge impact, you know, on me to this day.
With the amazing explosion of women's wrestling, which is the best thing that's ever happened to our sport, how important is it now that we have women coaches to be that example for young ladies?
I think it's so important because, it's one thing to talk about it, and it's one thing to see someone emulating that. And, whether it's someone that you can relate with, whether it's someone who looks like you or grew up in the same area or culture, or someone that you can just relate to in other ways. And you can do that, male or female, but I think something about having female coaches, it also changes the dynamic in the culture. I think it makes our program a lot fuller and richer, having both male and female role models. They're equally important, one without the other. So it's really cool to see female coaches, not just from the coaching aspect, but just to see leadership in another avenue and in a place that's male dominated is also, really important for women to see, whether they continue to coach or not. And, on another level too, you can just connect, in ways that, maybe a male can't. But again, I think both are really important, but providing more opportunities for young athletes to see female coaches, I think is really important.
What would you encourage folks out there that are looking to coach young gals and I guess all ages really, like how important is that educational piece?
I think the educational piece is really important, and it's something that's actually on my personal list of just developing the sport, just because, again, a lot of things have been by experience for me, and you want to see those things improve. And so I think a lot, I would say to those younger coaches or female coaches that think maybe they're not ready or they don't have the tools, you can learn a lot of those things if you have the heart, of a coach and want to teach and be that teacher, and have that role in athletes' lives. Doesn't matter what age, you can learn. There's a lot of educational pieces out there, and it's not easy. Depends what your path was or how far you went in your career and the coaches you had, but never let that just disclaim you from, being that coach or being that role model. You're sufficient enough to do it. You can learn, and especially if you've wrestled. And, I've seen coaches, female coaches who've been around the sport, maybe never wrestled, and you have tons to add to the sport as well. So I think that is a piece that you can add if you truly want to be a part of the sport and coach.
One of the things that you mentioned that really tripped with me, you said from going from being an athlete to being a coach, you took a little bit of time. There's a difference between who we are in our athletic career, and there is a need to transition to who we are as a coach. What are the differences that you noticed that maybe that you struggled with, or that you're like, wow, this is so much easier now that I'm coaching to understand? What was that transition like?
Yeah, I think off the top of my head, one challenge for me was, especially as an elite athlete and a lot of different sports, you're encouraged to be really selfish and to focus on yourself and to do what you need to do and always take care of you first. And so that was hard for me as an athlete to really embrace that. But when I retired, it completely flipped. There was no more, it's about you. It's completely about the people that you're serving and the people around you. And so you go from being so focused on yourself for such a long time down to what you eat and when you sleep and what you're going to work on that day, to thinking about everyone else around you and what's best. So I think that's probably a huge piece, that as an athlete, you transition and say, how can I be the best coach? So how can I serve people? What do the people around me need from me? So it's a very different mentality, and it happens.
How do you find that out? I mean, you're working with these developmental age groups. You've got, a lot of people that you're touching on a daily basis to try to help them. How do we communicate with them in that effective way?
And this is something that is actually something I've been talking about with some of our senior athletes. I think it starts with conversations. It starts with coaches. It starts in the practice room. It starts with parents. And it is literally the conversations that you have. And I think it's about remembering, what's important, remembering what we want the culture to be like, what we want out of the sport. And it starts from there, because really, you can put it out there and you can give information, but if people don't buy into that or they don't understand the vision, then it's not going to be important and it's not going to be a value. So I think it is really word of mouth, and it is in the practice room, and what you're saying, it's down to your vocabulary. It's down to what you're giving attention to, what you're showing the athletes you're valuing, that says a lot too. So I think it's as simple as that.
Sounds like it's more than just the X's and O's that a lot of us associate with wrestling.
Oh, it definitely is. That's probably the easiest piece.
And that which is why we can learn that as a coach, right? If I'm a coach that doesn't know wrestling, but I want to help, we can learn the technique. It's these human qualities. That's pretty cool. With the girls that you're working with right now, what are some of the focal points, and how does the age of the athlete relate to what you're focusing on for them?
Yeah, so I have a really interesting role, because I do work with our developmental group, which is U15 all the way to junior age, which is basically I can have as a young person 12 and a half all the way to 20. And then on the other side of that, I'm one of the resident coaches, so I do work with our senior athletes as well. So for me, it's kind of different caps, and it's not one for all. It's me thinking about each age group and how they're going to transition to that age group, and how ultimately will we get them down the pipeline to have enough tools and resources, and really just those thought processes to be successful at the senior level. So, I'll just start with U15, and this past summer was the first World Championship. So we kind of added that piece to our developmental group, usually where we work mainly with the cadets and juniors. And so that was a really fun age to work with, and having them at our prep camps this summer, it was really interesting for me to take a step back and see these are the best athletes we have at this age group, and to see the progression within women's wrestling, and also to in one summer literally work with our young athletes all the way to our senior athletes, and see what the differences are, and how I need to adjust how I coach, or how to get the best out of them. And it's an interesting challenge, but I think that from that young age group, it was a lot of fun, excitement. They had tons of energy, all the way to our juniors who knew they were there for camp, and they were kind of like all about business and take care of this, and we're getting ready for World Championships. So it was a huge learning curve for me. And I think if I start with U15 and just kind of talking about the athlete development model, you still want to keep it fun. They're excited to be around their teammates. They're excited for World Championships. They're excited, or any competition, right? It was exciting for them to be at the Olympic Training Center, to do all these things. So that excitement and fun was definitely a huge piece. All the hard work was done. So for me, I just thought the best with this age group, this U15, was they have tons of energy, so managing that and making sure that practices didn't run too long. If someone was talking too long, or someone was showing technique too long, I'm going to start to lose them. So I had to adjust that. I think that's one area where sometimes we can get really long-winded, especially in a technical area. And you just got to keep it simple. You got to keep it, here's A, B, and C. Go try it, instead of sitting there and talking. So that was a huge, I think, lesson for me. How can I make practices more creative? How can I get them thinking more, asking questions, and still keep them engaged? And then also reading the room and knowing when, maybe I had a 2-hour practice plan or a 90-minute practice plan, but we are going to have to cut it short, and things like that, and adjusting to the athletes. And then with our cadets, and throughout the year, we work with our cadets and juniors at the developmental camps. And so really that's where we get to, I feel like we have the most fun, because we, the pressure of competition isn't there. And now we get to really work on things that need improvement, but also it's so much more than just wrestling camp. It is a lot of development as the whole, again, senior athlete. What does a senior athlete look like? So at camp, we do goal setting, which I think is so important, and it's here on the model, for the age groups 13 to 17. And I would say that something that's interesting is, you have so many kids who say, when I was 8 years old, I wanted to be an Olympic champion. I think goal setting is such a huge piece, because you have kids that they're 5 years old, 6 years old. I want to be an Olympic champion, like I want to be like Helen Maroulis or Kyle Snyder. And I think that is such an awesome moment. And so I think where parents and coaches need to really step in is, okay, when and where do we set process goals and performance goals? Because it's really easy to set outcome goals. This is what I want to be. And, it's easy for a kid to say, I want to be in the Olympics. And so really at our camps, we talk about goal setting, and process goals. And, what are the steps? Because, once you're 10, once you're 12, once you're 15, you don't know every step of the way, but it really helps if your coach sits down and kind of walks you through each of those elements. Because if you're so focused on the outcome goal, you might be discouraged along the way if you're not finding small victories in between. So that's one thing that we really try to emphasize, like, what did you do good today? If you didn't accomplish, if you didn't, win this or win that, or you didn't, win every position, what is something that you did good today? So that's something that's really important. Also too, we talk about sports psych. A big one that I really feel like is important is we're in an individual sport, and I think team cohesion is such an important piece that I think we need to see more all the way up through juniors and seniors. And it is tough, because wrestling is you and your opponent, but really it's so hard to accomplish those things without a support system, without a teammate, without a great drill partner, someone who's going to encourage you, someone's going to push you. So I like the dynamic of our cadets and juniors, where we come together at camp, and we're immersed for 4 days with the same goals, talking about things like goal setting, nutrition, sports psychology. What are the things that you struggle with? What are some of the feelings or nerves, going into competition? How do you manage those? Do you have breathing techniques? Those are really cool ways for us to really be together and realize we have the same struggles, the same goals. They're very driven. And that's where I think it's really fun for the age group, for everyone to be together, and they're from all over the country. They get to see each other for these 4 days, and everyone has the same goal, right? To be the best that they can be. So that's a little bit of just, what we do at the camps.
It's a great pathway.
Yeah, it's been really fun. And, Clarissa Chun, our assistant national team coach, her and I are at the camps with these athletes, and we try to think of things that are really going to develop them, outside of just wrestling. And, I think, like I said, the goal setting is a big one. We talk about nutrition. What does a 2-day weigh-in look like compared to a 1-day weigh-in? What is healthy? What is your body weight and your percentage, and how much, should you be losing, right? If you're at a certain percentage and you're trying to drop down a weight, this doesn't make sense. It's going to affect your performance. So actually we've had them, get a calculator, look at their weight class, and figure out the percentage of where they're walking around at and where they need to be. So those are really, again, that's a lot to take in from ages 13 to 17, even 18. But again, if we're talking about it, and now your teammate is talking about it and this is what we're saying the standard is, we're hoping that, as they progress, it's going to start to make more sense. And it's not going to be, by the time they're senior, it's not going to be the first time they've heard about it, how to have good practices nutritionally, how much sleep to get, how much recovery to get, how much rest, right? Like, what do those things look like? And it can be overwhelming if this is, as a senior, this is the first time you're learning about it. So we really try to make it fun and squeeze in as much as we can in 4 days. And everyone has, a different area that they're learning about or want to know about. And they get to do it alongside their teammates and friends. And we get to immerse ourselves in wrestling. So it's pretty cool.
Seems like communication is such a cornerstone of your program. Could you talk a little bit more about maybe what obstacles you've had to overcome with as a coach through these communication obstacles to make sure that everybody kind of knows they're on the same page?
Yeah. So one, we definitely send out a lot of communication electronically or written. And, it's great to always have that written down or something to refer back to. And then second, usually we start off either camps or again, communication via email. We just check in, but we usually go over, this is, what our expectations are. This is what we're going to be covering. This is what we're going to do. We've been trying to really give the athletes a voice too, because coaches can talk a ton, and that's tough because if you're always talking and you're never giving them an opportunity, you're never hearing what they're really feeling or where they need help, how you can support them. So I think that is, an obstacle, because as a coach, you want to teach them so much. You want to give them as much information, but they can only take in so much information. You got to give them time to process it. And then you have to build them up that confidence to speak. Our challenge is, how do we get every girl to participate, and at least once? And if she's the shyest girl on her team, how can we use what she's learned in wrestling to be confident and speak and share with the group? And ultimately the goal through communication is, being a good listener and being respectful. And on the other end, communicating what it is you need and doing that confidently. And you can be a teacher in that too. So it needs to be a two-way street. So I think that's really important.
I like your listening piece. You probably read the book, but Never Split the Difference with Chris Voss. Have you had a chance to read that yet?
No, I haven't.
Pretty cool book. This guy's a former hostage negotiator for the FBI, and he teaches at Harvard now. But he talks about, he says, information is power. And how can you get information if you're talking all the time?
That's very true.
Yeah. Do you have any tips or strategies that you use when you're communicating to try to get information that helps you make the decisions?
I haven't been a great listener as well. And I think, again, like so many educational pieces on coaching and leadership have really helped me in that area. So I can't sit here and say, it's something I've thought of. There are things that I'm working on that have helped, are simple things like eye contact or just paying attention. And I think a big piece is making time for people and building rapport. And I think too, there's so many distractions. I'll say, even it's hard to just sit and listen sometimes, but it takes self-discipline to just listen and hear, because you're already thinking about how to respond. So just being in the moment more has been helpful, and really focusing on that person. Another thing I personally had to work on is just listening without my input. And sometimes that's body language and facial. Like, I don't, whether you're yawning or whether you're overly surprised, or it's just really just hearing the person where they're at. And it's so much self-discipline. So it's hard. It's really hard as a coach to do that, because you do feel like you're supposed to have an answer. You're supposed to give feedback. You're supposed to, do all these things, but solely just listening and then building that rapport, and then figuring out how to, give a suggestion or maybe ask. So I think more asking questions is helpful as well.
Do you notice when you do more asking questions, a different response from your athletes than if you tell them?
Yeah, I usually ask why, and then I'll say in the wrestling room, why do you want to do that? Why would you put your hand in that position? Why would your shoulder need to be there? Or what are you doing that's making this successful? So those questions are not even so much for me, it's for them to kind of go through that mental process of what am I doing? And then for someone else to vocalize it out loud amongst their peers is really important too. So again, it'd be easy for me to have an athlete point out everything they're doing. This is why they're doing it. But instead, you know what? Why do you put your shoulder here? Why do you hold this position? Or why are you dropping down there? And of course, it's great for me to interject when I need to, but for the most part, you got to give athletes a chance to really understand what they're doing. And they do that by speaking and sharing and asking them questions. So
What is it? What's so fun about coaching you? What are your favorite parts of this?
My favorite parts is it's really I love that we all have the same love for wrestling. So I already know where our wrestlers are in a different state of mind. So I'm like, all these kids love the same sport I do. So automatically speak the same language, and for me, it's fun to just spend time with them and hear, a lot about themselves. And it's like a story, right? Each of them, like where they come from and what they grew up in and their families. And for me, I've really enjoyed working with this younger age group because they still have a lot of fun. It's serious business, but they still like to have fun. They still like to have their teammates and their friends. And I think that is a huge growth mindset environment. I think when you are enjoying what you're doing, the pressure is not, as much as you get older and all the worries and everything else, it makes it a lot more fun for me to think outside the box. How can I teach them this position, or what's something that's challenging and fun? What's something, and I know they're up for it. They're like, let's do it, let's try it. And most of the time I think about what would have helped me when I was younger. I didn't understand the sport. I didn't move like a lot of wrestlers or boys or whatnot. And I'm thinking, okay, how could I teach that now? And how can I make it fun? And how, can I get them to think? And I like that they're open to do that. So that's been a really fun part for me.
How important is it for you to love what you're doing at the level that you're doing it at?
I think it's important at every level because, you can make a huge difference. Doesn't matter, but at here at the national level, college level, anything, I feel like I've had the same passion because it's not so much about the performance. It's about I'm a teacher. I have an audience, and I've got to bring my best performance. I've got to bring my best self to practice, because whether you're teaching, a 6-year-old how to wrestle, or you have someone, a senior athlete getting ready for world championships, it's, I think it's important to want to help the human development of it and help that person be their best. And it just so happens we all love the sport of wrestling, so makes it even easier. But that passion is really important because you give so much time and energy, and at the end of the day too, athletes can see through you, and they need that trust, and that trust piece to know, like, my coach is here, they enjoy what they're doing, they're here to help me. You're going to get so much more out of your athletes. Performance will take care of itself. You'll get so much more out of them in the process. So I think it's really important.
What helps you trust your athletes? And maybe even conversely, what helps them trust you?
Well, I have to start off giving trust. And, you know, a lot of people say trust is earned. And I think there's huge truth to that. I was very much an advocate of that. But I think it is important to give them that opportunity. And I think it takes time. You know, it takes a lot of patience. And so, you know, I think you're waiting for people to prove themselves or earn that. And I think it's important to kind of gift them that, because they're there for the, you know, the sport. They're there to learn. They're there, you know, to learn from you. What's most important is that they trust you. And then I think that keeps feeding back and forth. And so, you know, for me as a coach, I think I remember, hey, I want to know, when I was an athlete, I wanted to know the person in the corner. I trusted them. And, you know, and it can be as simple as just having their presence there. And so with athletes, I think it's really important to spend time with them, to be genuine with them, to be open and honest. I think it's important to also let them see you make mistakes. And I think it's huge, huge, huge to, we talked about the communication piece. And if you take communication out, it can be like kind of a fancy word. Just take some time to talk. Just talk to your athletes one-on-one, and give them that time and build that rapport and build that trust with them. And I think that just takes time for them, you know. And I think being a coach and just giving that trust, I think that shows them too, you know, like, wow, this is what coach is emulating. This is what coach is giving me. And then they're going to be open to trusting you if you do that for them.
Any tips or advice that you would give either young ladies getting into the sport, women that are looking to start coaching the sport? Any advice right now as a whole for the climate that we're in our sport right now and the growth of women's wrestling?
Yeah, so I would say, and I'll give a couple different areas. One, to athletes. You know, I think it's such a huge, female athletes, it's such a huge piece. Sometimes I think we tend to really compare ourselves to everyone else and everything that everyone's doing. And I think focusing on what you can control, focusing on your goals, focusing on those small victories, focusing on getting better are going to make your path so much easier, because you look around and you're either comparing yourself to a boy or a girl, or they won this or they won that. I think if you can really figure out what it is you love about the sport and the value that it gives you outside of winning and feeling good about that, you know, I think that is going to be more important than winning, and more important than losing, right? It's more important than the outcome. So please don't be tempted to get discouraged because someone else is in a different path or different level in their wrestling. And then I would say to female coaches, I would say, for me, my goal really is to build a bigger pool of women's coaches, because community is so huge. And I think it's huge for males and females, but I think with women, we really love that community and support. So if you know someone that may be thinking about coaching, or maybe discouraged, or maybe feel like they can't, pull them in and just build a big community, because then you can just keep building each other and learning from each other. It doesn't really matter where you started. It's about your intent and you having that love to teach and be a part of the sport. And so don't let those things limit you. And then lastly, I would say overall, and this is more like what I see at the age level that I'm at, I would say to parents is a huge piece, because when I see their kids for a year, I see a small reflection of maybe coach and what's going on at home or what's being taught. And I would say that, going back to the talking piece, talk to your kids, even if it's awkward, tough situations, and talk to them about victories and losses and what it means, and really talking through those things and through the process. So if you can talk to your kids, you know, when it seems kind of tough, or maybe you're not sure what they're thinking, like, you got to be the one to initiate and talk them through these things. So, you know, I think that's a huge piece. And lastly, you know, just emphasizing this, whether you're an athlete or parent, coach. I think our culture has started talking more about it, but our value can't come from the clothes that we wear, the wins, right? The best wrestling shoes or singlets, or I won this tournament, I did this, I won this medal. I think, coaches, you can really talk to your kids and tell them you're proud, not because they won a tournament, but because they fought really hard or they persevered through something. Parents, I say the same thing. Give your kids, tell them you're proud. Tell them why you're proud, not because of accolades and whatnot, and have those conversations. And, overall, again, it comes back to that piece of there's the moments on the mat, can win you more than medals off the mat, and that's something that you can take with you the rest of your life after your career. So I think those things are super important. And the more they're talked about, the more we start to change that culture.
Coach Medina, we have been lucky as a community to have you communicating with us today. Any closing statements before we sign off?
Yeah, I would just say, I can't wait to get back to wrestling, but in the meantime, take some moments to figure out what opportunities you can take and how you'll move forward.
For Coach Jess Medina, I'm Mike Clayton. We were moments off the mat with USA Wrestling. Thanks a lot. Take care.